Assalamualaikum. My name Azman Muhammad Farouk and I am part-time master student in computer science. I have spent the past 11 years working in software development area and my research topic best practices Restful API with token-based user authentication using PHP framework is very close to my heart. This topic is related to the work I do every day, and these research problems are also my problem based on my experience. So let's begin. Chapter 1 is about introduction. I will explain how I decide to do this research topic. Let's start with some facts. Here I have statistics for smartphone users worldwide from year 2016 until 2020. The numbers start with 2.5 billion in 2016, 2.7 billion in 2017, 2.9 billion in 2018, 3.2 billion in 2019, and 3.5 billion in 2020. The number is increasing from year to year. Based on the facts from 2016 to 2020, smartphone company predict by the end of this year, the number of smartphone users will increase to 37 billion around the world. I give my attention to this information. Now, the question is how smartphone exchange the data with the server, or how smartphone and the server talk to each other, or how apps in our smartphone like YouTube, Twitter send and receive data from the database or server. What technology behind it? The answer is API, or Application Programming Interface. So, what is API? In simple words, we can say API enable interoperability between the client, that is smartphone, and the server. Other definition is API is a software intermediary that allows two applications to talk to each other. For example, each time you use an app like Facebook, send an instant message, or check the weather on your phone, you are using an API. So, it is API only for apps or only used in smartphone environment? The answer no. API can be used to any devices or application that have internet connection on it. Today, lot of companies use API for every single digital services they provide. By using the API, companies can more easily provide services that can be accessed through the web, mobile apps, or even from the IoT device. It's like all-in-one concept and more cheaper. From the fact and information that I have, I come out with the research topic, which is best practices Restful API with token-based authentication using PHP framework. My intention from this topic is to know what is best practices element that every API should have. And then the theory behind Restful API concept itself. I need to know the basic and fundamental behind this technology. Token-based user authentication is for security purpose. The job is to authorize and authenticate every single request that the API receives from the client. And for that purpose, I choose something famous that used by many programmers and system analysts out there. Of course, it is open source and free. I choose PHP framework among other technology. I will explain later why PHP framework have been chosen. So here my research question. Whatever I do from the start until the end of this research, I need to answer to these three questions. Number one, what are the best practices element? that need to have in API development. Number 2, how PHP framework can help to develop secure token-based user authentication. And number 3, how to measure the performance of API that using PHP framework. With these 3 questions, it's covered the entire title of my research. So, from the research question, I produce research objective so that my research is always on track. My research objectives are: number 1, to identify which PHP framework that follow and fulfill best practices API development. Number 2, to identify the suitable PHP framework that have token-based user authentication. And number 3, to measure the performance of API that use PHP framework based on case study scenario. Because the title of this research is too broad, I need to set a scope for my research. The scope of the research will focus on finding the best PHP framework that can be used to develop API. That framework also needs to support token-based user authentication, that one of the requirements to secure the API environment. This research also finds the best practices element that most of API need to have to perform better. Next, here are 4 outcomes that will be obtained after I complete my study on related topic. Number 1, list of best practices element in API development. Number 2, we will know which PHP framework that support most of the best practices element in outcome 1. Number 3, we will know which PHP framework that support token-based user authentication. And number 4, the result of API performance that developed using PHP framework. Chapter 2 is about literature review. All the findings about API, best practices and API development, token-based authentication, and the comparison of PHP framework done in this chapter. So, let's see what is RESTful API all about. Why we call it as RESTful? REST itself was created in 2000 by computer scientist named Roy Fielding. The naming behind REST is representational state transfer. At that time, Fielding used REST to design HTTP 1.1 and Uniform Resource Identifiers or URI. REST used existing application layer protocol called Hypertext Transfer Protocol or HTTP functionalities. Now, REST concept is used in RESTful API to enable interoperability between client and the server. Not all API are RESTful, so here are 4 criteria that API should have to be RESTful. Number 1, using client-server architecture and should have clients, servers, resources element and access using HTTP protocol. Number 2, client and server communicate in stateless, meaning no data stored between requests and each request unconnected to each other. Number 3, information transfer follow a standard form that known and understood by the client and provider. And criteria 4, the hardware and software behind the provider or endpoint are invisible to the client. I have read and find previous paper regarding this research domain. From there, I found at least 9 elements that API should have. Number 1, versioning. The API should allow to do versioning on the resources. Number 2, description of every resource in API. Number 3, identification of resources. Number 4, the API should have error handling method. Number 5, documentation for every API resources and for every version. Number 6, can be used with parameters. Number 7, interaction with resources and support post, get, put, and delete method. Number 8, support of JSON format. And number 9, the API should have authentication method for security purpose. Now, what is token-based authentication? Token-based authentication is one of the methods used in web authentication to produce a more secure verification process. Token-based is categorized as possession category because the user needs to get the token generated by the server before being given access to the other resources. Usually, token authentication is used with password authentication to improve the level of security where the user needs to enter the password first before being given a token generated by the server. The method also known as two-factor authentication or 2FA. Restful have technology called JSON Web Token or JWT that follow the concept of token-based authentication. So, I decide to implement JWT in my research. JWT is created in December 2020 by Internet Engineering Task Force (IETF). JWT is an Internet Open Standard RFC 7519 that uses the token-based method in its operation. JWT has designed a method that allows a compact and self-contained way for secure transmitting data between parties using JSON format. The data can be signed using two methods, which is signed using a secret key with the HMAC algorithm or a public-private key pair using RSA or ECDSA. Here is the example of JWT token. On the left side, we can see encoded string that contain 3 base 64 URL strings separated by dots that can be easily parsed in HTML and HTTP environment. On the right side, we can see the decode string that we get from the token. It contains of 3 layers of data, that is header, payload, and the signature. The header contains of 2 parts, that is type of the token, which is JWT, and the signing algorithm being used, such as HMAC, SHA256, or RSA. Then this JSON is base 64 URL encode from the first part of the JWT. The second part of the token is the payload, which contains the claims. The claims are statements about an entity such as user data and additional data. There are 3 types of claim: registered, public, and private claim. The payload is then base 64 URL encode to form the second part of the JSON Web Token. The signature part consists of the encoded header, the encoded payload, a secret, the algorithm specific in the header, and sign that. The signature is used to verify the message wasn't changed along the way, and in the case of token signed with a private key, it can also verify that the sender of the JWT is who it said it is. From this sequence diagram, we can understand how the client in the example browser send and receive the request from the server. First, user enter their username and password in browser and click button to complete the login process. Browser send the request to the following resources URL, in this case /login, together with 2 parameters, that is username and password. When the server receives the request, it starts to process it. First, server check whether the username and password valid or not. If valid, the server will create a JWT and send it to the browser. After browser receives the response from the server, it will keep the token received to be used for the next request. At step 4, browser send another request and attach JWT on the authorization header. When the server receives this type of request, it will check the JWT signature and extract the user information from the token. If everything works fine, the server will respond back to the browser, indicate that the request is complete. The browser will keep the JWT and use it to send another request later. PHP stands for Hypertext Preprocessor. Is a widely used open source general purpose scripting language that is specially suited for web development and can be embedded into HTML. PHP is considered as one of the most popular scripting languages to be used in developing web applications due to the fact that it's dynamic, provides a large amount of flexibility, is easy to use and easy to learn. However, sometimes coding in PHP becomes a repetitive task. Moreover, the easiness to apply PHP into project also lead inexperienced developer to unorganized code process that they do not even notice. PHP framework come into the picture to help developing web applications smooth and faster by providing a template basic structure along with a complete set of built-in API, libraries, and numerous of existing which are developed by framework creator or the community. The advantage when using PHP framework as platform in system development compared to coding from scratch. What is the advantage of using PHP framework compared to coding from scratch or some programmer call spaghetti code? Number 1, faster development, less code to write, share library for common tasks, follow good coding practice, more secure than writing your own apps, better teamwork, and easy to maintain. This is the list of current trending PHP framework that available on the market. We have Laravel, Yi framework, Cake PHP, Symfony, CodeIgniter, and Zen framework. So, thanks to Google Trends that helped me to eliminate some framework and focus to 3 main PHP framework that most used in 2019. The 3 framework is Laravel, Symfony, and also CodeIgniter framework. From this chart, we can see the Google search trend for Laravel, Symfony, and CodeIgniter. The most popular search term that in blue line are for Laravel framework. Finally, I made a comparison table for the 3 framework chosen, but here I only state the important and different element. We start with 9 best practices element that we require in RESTful API development. Number 1, versioning. All 3 frameworks have support versioning. Number 2, description of resources. Only Laravel support this element. Number 3, identification of resources. Also Laravel only support this element. Next, error handling. Laravel have built-in error handling, while Symfony use general error handling or exception, and CodeIgniter use built-in error handling. Next, documentation of the web API. For this element, only Laravel support. Next, usage of parameter. All 3 framework have support this element. Interaction with resources using post, get, put, delete method. All 3 frameworks support this element. Support of JSON type. All 3 framework have support this element. And authentication method. Only Laravel have support this element. For community support, Laravel have very active support compared to two other frameworks. For Stack Overflow question, as on February 2021, Laravel have about 167,428 questions. Symfony have 68,118 questions and Coordinator around 68,814 questions. From the GitHub, I found that Laravel have received 45.5k stars, Symfony received 24.6k, and Coordinator only received about 15.5k stars. Thus, from the comparison table, can be concluded that Laravel framework has support most of the necessary features and requirements in the development of RESTful API. The other two frameworks, Symfony and Coordinator, have some shortcomings and do not support some of the required elements that we need. In this chapter 3, I will explain about my research methodology, what method and framework that I choose. The research required the development of a complete prototype system using PHP framework. Therefore, this system development need to follow and use software development life cycle, where the research need to complete each phase in SDLC. There are 6 phases start from planning, analysis, design, development, testing, and deployment. However, this research will go through only 5 phases, that is planning, analysis, design, development, and testing. The deployment phase is not required as this study will only develop a prototype to prove the finding in the literature review. The development of this prototype can be considered as small-scale development. Agile model was chosen to use as a framework in the development. Apart from small-scale development, Agile is chosen because of its flexibility and can speed up the development process. The most important thing in the development of this prototype is the testing stage, where the result of this test will determine whether the framework is the best to use for RESTful API or otherwise. So, at this is the activity and outcome at the discover stage. For activity 1, analyze and understand the current situation and identify the main problem. The outcome is problem statement in chapter 1. Activity 2, understand the needs and requirement of conducting the research based on the problem statement. And the outcome is research question, research objectives, research scope, and research significance. And for activity 3, review literature regarding RESTful API, API best practice, token-based authentication for API, and PHP framework comparison. And the outcome is literature review in chapter 2. Activity and outcome for system design stage. Activity 1, design RESTful API architecture, and the outcome is RESTful API architecture. Activity 2, design overall RESTful API flowchart. So the outcome is RESTful API flowchart. Activity 3, design JSON Web Token authentication flowchart. And again, we have outcome for JSON Web Token flowchart. And activity 4 is design entity relationship diagram for dummy data. So the outcome is entity relationship diagram. And activity and outcome for system development stage. For activity 1, setting up local development environment. Activity 2, setting up server environment. And activity 3, load dummy data to the database. And for these 3 activities, we have one outcome, that is working RESTful API with JWT authentication. And activity and outcome for testing and evaluation stage. We have setting up testing environment, correction for any error found, testing for JSON Web Token authentication, and also testing to access every API resource. And the outcome is RESTful API testing and evaluation result. So, before I end my presentation, I would like to express my appreciation to Dr. Afiza Ismail, that is my research method lecturer, and also Dr. Ali Seman as my project supervisor. Thank you so much for the guide and knowledge for this research. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you again, and Assalamualaikum.